Welcome to Torch's Mentor Connect. Each month we are highlighting one of our mentors to introduce them to the community and to glean some of their wisdom for future leaders. Today, I'm very excited to announce that we have Andora Gandy with us, founder and president of Repeated Excellence, and a Torch mentor for the past 6 years. Andora, welcome.
Thank you.
Very happy to have you here. One of the things that I mentioned to you in your nomination and in highlighting you as one of our mentors is that we really appreciate the way in which you embody the Torch value of be a self-aware continuous learner and how you empower leaders to think differently about their development. And I just want to honor that this is such an important quality, right, in guiding future leaders.
Yes.
So that sort of leads us into our first question, which is, what does the Torch value of be a self-aware continuous learner mean to you?
Yeah. So I think for me, I believe that it's very difficult to make specific changes if you want to change your behaviors or if you want to change habits, if you're not really self-aware. If you don't know that I'm missing something or I want to do something differently, then it makes it a little bit harder to make that change. And so what it means to me is that I'm very self-aware. I took the emotional intelligence assessment and was very high on self awareness. So I think that for me, what it means is that when I'm able to identify for myself that, oh, I need to do this a little bit differently than I did last year or last weekend or whatever the case may be, it helps me to move forward a lot faster because I know that it's something that I need to change about myself, or I know that it's something that I need to change about my environment, or it's something that I need to change about, how I'm going to do something or how I move forward. So that's what it really means to me.
Mm, I love that. So it sounds like there's a real openness and willingness to receive feedback, right? And understanding that there's a difference, right? Whether we have an intention to do something that you're really open to understanding that the impact may be different, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I kind of based my business on growth, and it's very difficult for us to grow and change if we're not self aware and if we can't be a little bit more introspective. I love when people can reach inside themselves and say the hard stuff of what they are not. Because that means that they can actually get to where they're trying to be. If they can say, I'm not this or I'm not that, but I want to be. So, growth is a big part of that for me.
Mm-hmm. I love that. That was really beautifully said. So what's something that you're learning right now in your own, whether it's a craft or something you're learning in your professional life, like what's something that you're learning right now?
Yeah, so I think I'll do twofold. I have a strong passion for communication, and my degree is actually in communication, but that I got my degree many, many years ago, and I do a lot of research on communication. I teach people how to communicate, but I said I want to learn more about how communication is different. So right now, I'm learning some different techniques around interpersonal communication and some of the behaviors that go along with it, some of the psychology that goes along with it. And I felt like I needed to, first of all, I teach people to do it, but I'm like, I want someone to teach me. So I decided to take a class on communication. And the other thing is, so my husband has a 3-year-old daughter, personally, a 3-year-old daughter, and she is my stepdaughter, and I'm learning how to communicate with a 3-year-old, which is very interesting and fun, but also, trying to figure out how do you communicate with adults, and then now trying to figure out how do you communicate with a child, which is
Right.
very different, but in a lot of ways also very similar. So I'm always watching her to get ideas about how to actually work with adults, which is very interesting.
Right. Because
Yeah.
I noticed that like sometimes I've had this thought of like when I see kids, I think they're just so precious. Like they're
Yes.
just so endearing and lovely. And I'm like, I really would love to see adults in that way. Like if I could just see everyone's, inner child, maybe
Yeah.
that would help in my communication. So I could see like, yeah, learning to communicate with a child, it because we have more years on earth, right? Like it maybe allows us to have more patience than we would with an adult. And so like, how do we translate that into our communications? And
Absolutely. Well, I always say, so she's in the why, asking why all the time. Why this? Why? And I believe that as adults, we still ask the question why, probably a lot, but we just don't speak it. We don't say it. It's in our minds of why do I have to do that? Why do I have to do this? But we may not always communicate it, because somewhere between when we were 3 and when we become adults, something gets lost in how we actually communicate to people. And that there's some fear with asking why. There's a lot of fears that she's not afraid of much of anything because she doesn't really know to be afraid yet. But as we grow older, we start to become afraid of being able to speak up. And so we lose some of that asking the question of why, which I always find so fascinating.
that's really fascinating. So could it be that we're afraid to ask why because it might come off as defensive or unwilling, especially, I would imagine, especially in the workplace, right? Somebody tells us something to do something and then we're like, well, why? I'm not really understanding that it.
Yes. Yeah. I think there's so many different reasons as to why we don't ask the why question. Sometimes we don't ask because we don't really want to know the real answer. Sometimes we don't ask because we've asked before and no one really gave us a clear answer. So I think there's a lot of reasons why we don't ask the why questions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, I love this. I could talk to you all day. It's so
I
fascinating.
know. Yeah, me too.
So fascinating, right? Because even like when we make decisions, right, or we think about what we want
Yeah.
in our profession or in our life, right? Like the question of why is so important, right? Because if we get to the root of what we want, there might actually be 10 different ways to arrive at that same thing, right? If we
Oh,
get
yeah,
to the core root of it.
absolutely.
So very fascinating. Well, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and ask you, what do you enjoy most about being a mentor?
Wow, I love this question. I think the first of all, I love people. Doesn't matter what kind of person it is, I love people. And so interacting, the experiences that I have had with mentoring people with Everwise has been amazing, because I've had an opportunity to meet so many different kinds of people, but also to meet so many different kinds of people on their different journeys. They've all been on different journeys. And there's sometimes I might get a request and it's something that I'm like, I have no idea what this person does. But I'm like, I'm up for the challenge because I want to learn from the mentees just as much as they might learn from me. And so one of the things that I love more than anything with working with mentees and being a mentor, is just kind of walking alongside a person and helping them slowly unveil the clear vision, making the path and the vision a little bit clearer for them as to where they want to go. I think one of the beautiful things that you all do is start with, what are your goals? And so I have an opportunity to work with them and help them figure out how to get to their goals. But we do it very gradually. And I love it when people kind of get it and they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't think I'd be able to do that. I had one mentee recently where she was talking about boundaries. And I recommended a book for her, and it was just so awesome to hear her talk about how much our conversations in that book helped her. And that's the thing I love about mentoring, is that people are they're looking for something and it's inside of them. They don't quite know how to get there. And we as mentors, it's our responsibility to help them figure out how to get there. And watching that unfold is really awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to be that vessel and like watch
Yeah.
them come to your
Yeah.
point, what they already know is true. And I would
Yeah.
imagine too, you're an incredible mentor in circling back to that question of why, right? Like sometimes we make goals because we think they're the things that we need to be doing. And so
Right.
I can already tell from your level of emotional intelligence and wisdom that you're like, well, maybe let's think about, why is this your goal? Like how does this relate holistically to yourself as a professional? So
Exactly. Yes.
very cool. Well, reflecting on your own journey and your own leadership development, what advice would you have to your younger self if you were mentoring
Oh,
yourself?
a younger self, what would I tell me? I think I would probably say to take the risk and go the road less traveled. There's a poem, I don't know if you've heard it or not, by Robert Frost.
Hmm.
And I think the poem is called The Road Less Traveled, but in the poem he just talks about how there's a person walking and there's two paths. One is a path less traveled and one has where you can see where the path has been cleared and there is just an easier walk. And I think that sometimes as a leader, especially as a leader, we follow certain paths. Like I was on a different path and had no idea. I had a clear vision of where I wanted to go, but I didn't get to that where my vision was. I got to a different vision, a different path. I went a different path. And I probably would have never done that had some things happened and not happened. But if we don't take risk and say, I'm going to try something different, even though it's maybe not something that I completely know how to do, or even though it's not something I ever thought I would do. Like I never thought that I would own a business. And I have been doing this now for 5.5 years, almost 6 years now, and successfully. And I would have never ever dreamed, I had never had a desire for it, but I took a risk and I took a path that for my family was definitely not traveled. So I think that sometimes we need to step outside of our comfort zone, step outside of the norm, and just look at things a little bit differently rather than taking the same path of where if you have that tunnel vision to say, I want to be here in 15 years, you can get there, but maybe you want to take some different paths on getting there because it could take you to something better than what your vision was. I think that's what I would tell my younger self.
That's really lovely. Such good advice. And too, when you're like the tunnel vision of arriving, sometimes once we arrive at the place, we realize I'm not even happy here.
Yes,
I thought I
exactly.
want to be this, here I am, and I'm not happy.
Yeah. Well, I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier about being open. I tell people, I even tell mentees this a lot, of to be open to things that you just never thought that you would do, because you never know what might come to you. And if we close out that door, then we might be missing on a really amazing opportunity.
Hmm. Yeah, it's so true. And just, yeah, and just knowing that, like you said, it's probably and likely not going to look like what you might have anticipated. And so to
Yeah,
just have that curiosity, right?
exactly. Exactly.
Okay, so for our last question, I wanted to know, right now, I think it's a time where many leaders, many professionals are sort of asking themselves, what more can I be doing, right? We're in a pandemic, we're amidst looking at racism and social unrest in our country, we're dealing with economic uncertainty. And so I'm curious if there's anything that you would actually advise not leaders to do more of, but to do less of, right?
Wow. I love that question. And how often do we say, what can we do less of? We're
Mhm.
usually saying, what can we do more of? So I love this question. I would say to do, especially with everything that's going on, to do less talking.
Mm.
And the reason I say that is because as leaders, we all feel like we have to say something, we have to do something. And right now, people have things to say. And so we probably should listen and try to figure out how do we join together and collaborate more with people as we're hearing what they're saying rather than telling. I know there are a lot of times leaders, we do a lot of talking because we have the experience. We know exactly where we want to be and what we want to do. We know the path, even from a coaching perspective. And so we tend to talk, 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 talk. And we might listen a little bit, but we have kind of sometimes we have our own agenda, and that's not all leaders. And I think that it's important for us to really talk less and just listen, because there's so much in people's words that I think sometimes we just completely miss. Listen and be present.
Mhm. hmm Which is another torch value, to be present always, which is
Yeah.
another thing that came up in everyone noticing your incredible work here at Torch as a mentor. And so I really appreciate that. So,
Yeah.
so for leaders to do less talking and more listening.
For listening.
Well, Andora, it's been such a pleasure. I'm so grateful to have been able to sit down with you and learn from you and to share your work as a professional and as a mentor. And we're just really grateful for you being a part of the Torch community. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you.